Hi there, welcome to the optional extra video for the Audi Coupé video. If you haven't seen the Audi Coupé video, there's a link above and it's probably better if you see it in that order, else this will just be confusing. So first of all, I'd like to say that the Audi Coupé, one of the reasons why I decided to do this video was I just didn't really understand it as a child and I hadn't really focused on it since then. And I just saw this car, it had a C on the back of it and it was just quite confusing. I see some websites that say, oh, the Audi 80 and Coupe were meant to be very close. I didn't see the connection at all, but Audi tried to distance the Coupe from the 80, which made sense by using things like the twin headlights that they put on the front, which was also used in the US for the Audi 4000, which was the Audi 80, but rebranded. At that time, my father had Audi 100s. He managed to get himself an Audi 200 Turbo, which was the coolest car ever. So I was aware of Audi 100s and 200s, but wasn't really focused on the 80s and certainly not the coupe. I didn't really see, and to be honest, I wasn't going down to car dealerships every 5 minutes. I couldn't even drive. So anyway, I just wanted to find out exactly what was going on. I mean, I saw the Quattro, I knew about the Quattro, but these were rare as hen teeth, whatever the phrase is. They're incredibly rare, and I certainly didn't see one on the road. So anyway, that's part of the reason why I started to look into this. Looking at the Audi 100 Coupe, the first coupe that Audi created back in 1969, I presume it's the first one. The failure of the Audi 100 Coupe could have been because it had a pretty high price. So when it came to the Audi Coupe in 1980, Audi obviously wanted it to be cheaper and so have a better chance of success. So they based it on the entry-level Model 80 rather than the more expensive 100. The Audi 100, they did have the Avant model, but I don't really classify that as a coupe because it was essentially just a hatchback version of the 100. Anyway, the coupe had the cachet of the Audi 100's 5-cylinder engine, which was in 1980 still a pretty big deal. I think it had first come out in 1976 around then on the Audi 100. And they were touting it for all it was worth, saying it was, it was better than a V6 and better than a 4-cylinder. But of course they tried to make the Audi Coupe cheaper, but it cost more than all Audi 80s and even some of the Audi 100s, so it still wasn't a relatively cheap car. But I guess the market came to them and it hit a sweet spot, and I think probably also the fact that it had that Audi Quattro cachet to it. People essentially were more drawn to it, and it became, as we saw, relatively popular. The sunroof, I didn't really talk anything about the sunroof, but it popped up. It had sort of a little back pop-up thing, so you could, which I find it the most useless thing on a sunroof ever. They say, oh, it adds a bit of air to the cabin, but it doesn't add any air to the cabin. You might as well just crack a window or something like that. It's completely useless. Anyway, so it only popped up at the back. It didn't actually slide back at all. It didn't completely open, as that would have limited the rear headroom, and they were trying to focus on the fact that it was a 2+3, as they said. So anyway, I'm sure in my mind I would have thought that would have been a completely useless thing to add to a car, because the whole pop-up thing, in my mind, not particularly useful. It also didn't have a folding rear seat. Obviously it wasn't a hatchback, but the rear seat wouldn't fold either. So it was of limited practicality as far as a car. It really was really just essentially a saloon car. So obviously the Audi Coupe, they focused pretty heavily on fuel economy. And in the 1970s, obviously we had the 1973 fuel shock, the fuel crisis. And even so, a lot of cars were focusing on the whole fuel efficiency thing. But of course in 1979, even more so with Iran and problems like that, there was like a second fuel shock at that time. But Audi saw that, particularly with their 5-cylinder engine and some of their smarts that they had around engines, they could have a competitive advantage over arch rivals BMW and Mercedes, who they were starting to try and compete with. So the Audi Coupe's engine had a high compression ratio of 10:1, which was pretty high at the time. They also focused on low revs when idling. It had a digital idle speed stabilization system, which of course doesn't help the official figures, but you know, on the overall fuel efficiency of the car, obviously helps it out. And then of course it didn't have a 5-speed gearbox. It had a 4+E gearbox, so basically the 5th gear was a cruiser. And of course it had the econometer with that annoying little light that popped up to tell you to change gear, which, you know, can be annoying. To be honest, I had that on my VW Golf. It wouldn't put a light on, but it would sort of put a little thing showing what the suggested gear would be. And I thought it was fine for that, but I could see how the econometer might be a little bit frustrating. They also had it in the 1980s on the Polo and the Volkswagen Polo, and I'm sure they had it on other cars as well. But obviously quickly they realized that people were looking to the Coupe for performance, particularly with the light of the Audi Quattro. And people just didn't really connect this car with fuel economy at all. People didn't care about the fuel economy at that point. Also, briefly in the video, I talk about the Audi 80 and the Audi 90. I didn't, again, before this video, I didn't quite understand what the Audi 90 was. I figured they'd sort of maybe lengthen the Audi 80 and they were trying to make something in between the 80 and the 100. But it wasn't that at all. The Audi 90 was essentially just an Audi 80 with higher spec and a larger engine. So it was just a different model variant on the Audi 80. And obviously it didn't seem to work very well because they dropped the Audi 90 name after a while anyway. And the 1984 Audi Coupe Quattro was basically an Audi 90 Quattro because it was a higher spec level with a coupe body. So essentially they didn't do a lot of work. They just essentially just moved the bits over from the Audi 90 Quattro and just moved them in. The Audi Coupe Quattro has one really cool party piece, which I didn't mention in the video, which a lot of the Quattros had in the 80s. I'm not sure if they do that now, but the rear defroster has Quattro written into the heating element. So of course when you're defrosting the window, you get a cool pattern on the car, so you can see. Anyway, I think that looks cool. So it's a fun thing, and to be honest, we need more fun things in cars. I think we need more frivolity in life. And then the second generation Audi Coupe was designed by a guy called J. Mays. And yes, that is his real name. It's not his first initial. His real name is J, just the letter J. I'm sure he had a lot of time trying to explain that as a child and growing up. But it's named after his grandfather, who was S.J. Mays. Again, I don't know what they were thinking when they did that, and they thought, oh, it was a good idea. Oh yeah, the grandfather really liked the fact that his name was just one initial. I'm sure that, you know, the grandson will love this. Anyway, so that's his real name. He now works for Ford. He worked for Volkswagen doing the Beetle, as I mentioned, and then he moved to Ford, did a whole load of stuff for Ford for many, many years, and now works for Whirlpool, for whatever reason. So I'm sure he's having great times doing stuff there. Anyway, so the Coupe, I thought that talking about sales of the coupes, particularly in the 70s and 80s, when I did the video on the Ford Capri, my understanding was like coupes were fading out in the 1980s because Ford were trying to sell the Capri and it just wasn't selling at all. And of course everyone was going to hot hatches, but apparently not so in Germany. Apparently in Germany, it might have been fading out in the rest of Europe, but it's still in Germany, coupes were still kind of a thing. 8% of all cars in the 1980s in Germany were coupes, so you know, it's still a fair amount, a fair size market. Obviously, Audi really hit the sweet spot with the 1980 Coupe, and that's the reason why in 1988 they saw a big future growth for coupes. So by 1988 they were making it a completely separate design and things like that. And so you can see that in BMW also making a coupe, and you know, it seems that the market, instead of contracting, was actually growing. And maybe that's why Ford brought the Probe from the US into Europe in the early 90s, because they saw, well, it was maybe the Calibra was out and they needed something to compete with it, and maybe it wasn't the fact that the Capri was failing, maybe they just needed a new design, something new and exciting. So finally, this whole thing was just a big trip down memory lane. I'm sure you've seen videos that I've produced and they've sparked a whole load of things from your childhood. Well, Audi things and VW things spark all my childhood memories. My dad had an Audi, my mum had a Volkswagen, various different ones, and so whenever I see the brochures, that format, it always just brings back all the memories, and yeah, I really enjoy it. So anyway, that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.